Hello, my name is Jonathan Watsley, Director of Wealth at Work. Well, I think there's a realisation now that this is not just about pensions, and that freedom and choice is actually about how you take retirement income, which means that everything needs to be looked at that may contribute to that income in retirement. So that penny is beginning to drop, I think, with a lot of employers, employees and trustees. I think the other thing that's starting to emerge is some of the risk factors. So employers are now starting to worry quite considerably about people taking money out before they retire. So of course, if people start taking money out of their pensions whilst maybe in their mid to late 50s, that may deplete their pot and then they're not actually able to retire perhaps when they would want to. So that's clearly a risk that needs to be managed. There's another risk, which is where some employers have not actually changed the structures that they had before freedom and choice. So some of them may have, for example, annuity panels in place. Well, of course, it's very dangerous to have an annuity panel in place if you don't actually have the other flexibilities available, because that could make an employee believe that annuity is the right route. And I think there's also a more general risk of people making just poor decisions at retirement. So increasingly we're hearing from companies who want to start putting some retirement service in place to ensure that people are informed when it comes to making those pretty big decisions. Well, I think what we've seen over the last 12 months is really the early adopters, so those employers that are actually quite concerned about this. Potentially it's the employers that have a number of people that are in the age bracket, where actually they could retire or they could certainly take money from their pension. And so some of those early adopters have started to put in a retirement service to ensure that their employees understand actually what the options are available to them, and actually they have a way of delivering on the outcomes that they need, no matter how they might want to take retirement income. I think that that really falls into three categories. It's providing the education, so people understand what's available. It's providing regulated advice, so that they actually have someone explaining to them what's right for their own personal situation. But it's also actually having the facility available, the services available to implement whatever is the right option for that individual. I think also there's some myths out there which are creating quite a lot of noise. So things like robo-advice is talked about quite a lot, but robo-advice is really difficult to implement at decumulation or at retirement. Very easy to do it when you're accumulating money, but quite difficult when it comes to retirement. And that's really because it's not just about the pension you're in at the moment, it's about all the pensions you may have held. It's also about other assets you may hold, whether that be ISAs, deposit accounts. It's also things about such as health, and all that needs to be considered, and that's quite hard to put in place through robo-advice, particularly bearing in mind that people may need to be revisiting that every year during retirement. So, you know, how is robo-advice really going to work when you're 80? So I think some of that behavioural stuff, some of the more emotional stuff around retirement won't be served by that, which is why a lot of companies are now looking at a retirement service that has that triple lock, as it were, of the education, the regulated advice, and then the implementation of whatever is right for that employee. There are three key questions that employees have around freedom and choice. So the first question is, well, what are the options that I have? So that's really explaining to them what freedom and choice means. There are lots of options there. It's not just about pensions, but they need to understand advantages and disadvantages of going down certain routes. The second question they often have is, okay, so if I understand what those options are and I generically understand the advantages and disadvantages, how do I know what is right for me? Because my situation is probably very different from anybody else's situation. And then the third question is, well, how do I implement what might be my chosen option or options? And really that goes back to the three elements of education to answer that first question, so making sure employees understand what the options are, regulated advice to ensure that that individual gets something that's very personal to them and is relevant to them. And then the third thing is making sure that there is service provision to ensure that whether that individual wants drawdown, an annuity, phased retirement, a combination of options, that is freely available. I think this is one of the major changes of freedom and choice, because employees really need to prepare earlier now. And that really starts with glide paths. So a lot of employers will change the investments in pensions in the lead up to potential retirement date. Different employers will have different lengths of time for this, but commonly we see 10 years. So if somebody could potentially take their money at age 55 and they're starting on their glide path 10 years before, that means that preparation needs to start at age 45 in selecting the right glide path for the right retirement option that you think you may take. But of course, as you go through that 10-year period, things may change and your view may change. So it's really important in those pre-retirement years to keep on top of actually how your pension is progressing, whether your objectives have changed, actually whether your retirement plans have changed totally perhaps since you made that initial choice. So that those interventions of education in pre-retirement are really important also. And then finally you get to what I would call the at retirement phase, which is when you're seriously thinking about retiring. And that's where you really need to take stock of what you've got, have good education around the options available, and then go through that process of advice and then making sure there's a service provider that can implement the solution that's right for you.